Remember when Pilate stood before Jesus? We might say Jesus stood before Pilate, but knowing the whole story, Pilate stood before Jesus. And Jesus said something about truth, and Pilate says, what's truth? You see, Pilate was living a life that was so mixed up, he didn't know what truth was. But he didn't wait for an answer. I really believe if Peter looked at Jesus and said, let's go back in here a minute. Pilate would have taken Jesus back into his hall or house or whatever, and he would have looked at him and sincerely said, what is truth? And what? Tell me. All Pilate wanted to do was wash his hands of the whole matter. Truth did not really matter to him. And therefore he was not free in the spiritual sense of the word. In Proverbs chapter 4. An interesting chapter. We say that Proverbs is the wisdom book of the Bible, and it is. But in chapter 4, the whole chapter is under the heading, Wisdom is Supreme. And 2 verses tell us very clearly what to do about that. Proverbs 4, verse 5, get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. In other words, we get wisdom, we get understanding, and we live by it. We don't, depending on the circumstance, slide around it. Because it would be hard to do it right here. Oh, he says don't swerve from it. And verse 7. Wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. That last term, get understanding, you go back into the original language, it would mean, or whatever else you get wisdom, get understanding. All the things that you accumulate, all the stuff that we have, all those things that we just got to have, all of that kind of thing is someday going to belong to somebody else, or where we go. But wisdom is supreme. Wisdom will remain. And it is what we are to get. And of course, the book of Proverbs is often referred to by some people as it's a book of pithy sayings. And they repeat some, they quote some, they like to live by some, and others they ignore. But the whole book of Proverbs is worth reading. It's a roadmap for living life. It says in there that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When we begin to reverence God, we begin to understand that He is indeed the instructor, and He has so much material He wants to let us understand. We begin to accumulate that wisdom from Him. Some people say, well, you know, I got a lot of knowledge. And that's a little different than the man that I work for, Mr. Marvin Dice, in the tire shop for 14 years. I don't know how often he said it, but he said it often enough that I never forgot it. He was what we often call a tinkerer. Any of you are tinkerers? Like to tinker around with stuff? Well, he was so good at tinkering that the company that he used their process to cap tires, he bought materials from them, He was so good at tinkering that they made him sign a paper saying if he ever put anything together that was worth something, they'd get credit for it. But now, do you know how Norman Dice explained himself to me? He said, I don't have much knowledge. Boy, I got a lot of common sense. I've never forgotten that. The fact that we got knowledge, and you know, everybody in this room probably has knowledge about something that we can do fairly well. But knowledge, it's good. But you see, there's a difference between knowledge, which is accumulating the facts. We know what we're learning, we know what we're supposed to do, we know how to do it, that's knowledge. But wisdom is knowing what to do with all the facts in any given situation. And when we realize that knowledge is not always the most beneficial thing. Young fellow who came through the Mount Pleasant Youth Group way back before Bobby became youth pastor. Not believe it. This was back when his mother and I were the youth leaders. 52. When was it back? Back in the 60s. A long time ago. Well, one Sunday morning, a young man who went up through the youth group was now in his second or third year in college. He says, after the service that morning, he said, Gary, I want to talk to you. So we met right back there in the corner. He says, I have a question. And I thought, uh-oh, because he could ask some good ones. And I wasn't sure what he was going to say. I said, all right. He said, is it possible to be too smart to know the Bible, or to believe the Bible? And I said, well, Sue. And I hope that he's going to say me. But I thought he was smarter than that. He said, no. I said, one of my professors this week said, you get some knowledge, you learn, you know that that book don't amount to anything, meaning the Bible. Just a bunch of stories that somebody put together. He said, when you're smart enough, you know you don't have to rely on that kind of stuff. So I said, yeah, I believe it is possible to be too smart to believe the Bible. Have too much knowledge. Because when you have too much, we begin to be relying on ourselves. And we go against what he's saying. All about you. About you. We need to understand that. And so some people say, well, how do you get wisdom? Well, James tells us very clearly. Chapter 1, verse 5, he says, if you lack wisdom, ask God, and he'll give it to you freely. He won't ridicule you for being a dummy. He won't say, everybody else knows that, why don't you? He just gives you what you need.